Pull a chair closer. Quinn Hartley was hired for 1 week, and at the end of that week, the billionaire she had been hired to assist would choose her over his empire. She did not know that yet, when she stepped out of the Tuesday morning rain into the lobby of Vance Tower, holding a folder of paperwork and a cup of cheap coffee gone cold from the subway ride. She only knew that her staffing agency had called her at 4 a.m, told her the assignment was for the week, told her the client was Ethan Vance himself, and told her that under no circumstances was she to refer to herself, in front of the press or in front of the Vance board, as a temporary hire. She was 27 years old. She had a degree in hospitality management she still carried in a folder because her parents had framed the original. She had spent 3 years staging luxury homes for buyers who never noticed her, 6 months coordinating private dinners for an event firm that had folded in the spring, and the last 4 months wondering whether she should leave the city altogether. The agency had paid her last rent installment for her. She owed them this week. The lobby of Vance Tower was the colour of cold champagne, polished platinum walls, ivory marble underfoot, a single living olive tree in a teal ceramic pot near the elevators. Quinn had worked in luxury settings before, and the first thing she always noticed was the silence. Real money sounded like silence. Behind the reception desk, a woman in a charcoal blazer looked up at her, with the careful, neutral courtesy of someone trained to identify, within 3 seconds, whether a stranger belonged in the building. "Hartley," Quinn said. "Quinn Hartley. I'm expected on the 44th floor." The receptionist's eyes flickered to a screen. Whatever she saw made her smile widen by half a degree. "Of course, Miss Hartley. Mr. Pierce is meeting you upstairs. Please." The elevator climbed in silence. Quinn watched her own reflection in the brushed steel doors and tried not to look like someone who had taken the subway. Her dress was a plain ivory sheath she had bought on clearance 2 seasons ago, paired with her one good pair of low heels and a thin gold chain that had been her grandmother's. She had pinned her dark hair back with 2 simple combs. The agency had told her to dress like a young woman who could stand quietly behind a billionaire at a charity gala without making the cameras want to look at her instead. She had done her best. The numbers above the elevator doors counted up quietly, in pale blue digits that did not click. 12, 18, 26. Quinn had grown up in a house where the elevator was a single freight car at the back of a Pennsylvania department store, and the numbers had been painted by hand. She thought about that house, briefly, the way a person thinks about a coat she has left in a different room. Her mother had worked in that store on Saturdays, between the school week and the church week, and had taught Quinn to fold scarves in 3 motions. Quinn could still fold a scarf in 3 motions. She doubted, very much, that this building would ever ask her to. The doors opened onto a hush of pale wood and glass. A man was waiting for her with his hands folded behind his back. He was perhaps 50, silver at the temples, dressed in a navy suit that looked carved rather than tailored. He introduced himself as Marcus Pierce, chairman of the Vance Holdings board, and reminded her that they had spoken through her agency. Quinn answered him by name and waited. He told her, simply, to walk with him, and turned without waiting to see whether she would. Quinn followed. The corridor opened into a long room with a single wall of windows and a view of the Hudson lying flat as grey glass under the rain. Pierce did not invite her to sit. He laid out the contract in flat, measured sentences. She had been hired for the week, from this morning until Friday evening. Her title on paper would read Executive Guest Liaison. Her actual function was to stand beside Mr. Vance at 6 public engagements, 3 private dinners, and the closing ceremony of the Halberstram negotiation. She would be photographed. She would be spoken about. She would not, under any circumstances, speak to the press. Quinn told him she understood. Pierce continued, without acknowledging the answer. Mr. Vance, he said, did not yet know that the agency had placed her. He had been told that one of the firm's own internal communications staff would be accompanying him this week. They would be introducing her to him in 15 minutes. He would be displeased. She would not react to that displeasure. Quinn folded her hands in front of her and told him, mildly, that they were clear. Pierce studied her for a long moment and observed that she had an unusually calm face. He made it sound like a small clinical finding, not a compliment, and corrected her gently when her thanks suggested otherwise. Then he turned toward the window. On Friday at 6 in the evening, in this building, in the room directly above us, the Vance Holdings Board will vote on the merger with the Halberstram Group. If the vote passes, Vance Holdings becomes a subsidiary. The Vance name comes off the masthead, and a 40-year empire built by a man who started with one warehouse in Queens becomes a line item in a Geneva spreadsheet. The vote will pass. We need the optics of this week to be flawless. That is why you are here. He did not look at her as he said any of it. Quinn did not let her face change. Quinn thanked him quietly for explaining. He told her, without turning, that he was not explaining. He was instructing. There was, he said, a difference. A door opened at the far end of the room. Quinn turned, and that was the first time she saw Ethan Vance. He was tall and lean, in a slate-grey suit without a tie, his dark hair shorter than the photographs the agency had shown her, his face thinner than she had expected. He could not have been older than 33. He carried a leather folder in one hand, and the kind of stillness in his shoulders that very tired people learn to perform in public. His eyes, when they found her, were a pale, level grey. He did not smile. "Marcus," he said, without taking his eyes off Quinn. "Who is this?" "This is Miss Hartley. She will be accompanying you this week." "I told you I did not want anyone accompanying me this week." "And the board overrode that preference," Pierce said mildly. "Miss Hartley comes recommended. She has hospitality and event experience. She will be photographed at your side. She will be silent when you speak, and she will be elsewhere when you do not need her. Think of her as a coat you have to wear in the rain." Ethan Vance did not look at Pierce. He looked at Quinn for several seconds longer than was comfortable, and then he said, very evenly, "Miss Hartley, I apologize for that comparison. It was rude, and it was inaccurate." She told him, gently, that it was all right. He told her it was not all right, that it was only Tuesday, and turned to Pierce at last to ask where she was staying. Pierce answered that the firm had taken her a room at the Wexford until Saturday. Ethan rejected that arrangement at once. He wanted her moved to the residence floor of this building, the 14th, where there was a guest suite that nobody used. If she was going to be at every meal and every event, he said, she should not be commuting through Manhattan twice a day in heels in October. Pierce began to protest something about the guest suite. Ethan cut him off and confirmed the floor, and looked at Quinn for the first time as a person instead of a problem, to ask whether the arrangement was acceptable to her. She had not expected to be asked. She told him yes, and thanked him. Ethan said they would begin in 20 minutes, asked Marcus to find Miss Hartley a coffee that was not from the lobby cart, and instructed her to bring whatever she had brought with her. They had, he said, a great deal to do this week. He turned and went back through the door he had come from. The latch closed behind him, with a small, precise sound. Pierce released a breath through his nose that was not quite a sigh, and warned her not to mistake what she had just seen for kindness. Mr. Vance, he said, was exhausted, was angry at him, and was already trying to inconvenience the board through small choices. She was a small choice. Quinn acknowledged the warning with a quiet word. Pierce told her he would bring coffee, and walked away. Quinn stood alone for a moment in the long room, holding her folder of paperwork against her stomach, and thought, very clearly, very privately, I have been hired for 1 week, and at the end of that week, the man I have just met is going to lose the company his father built him, and nobody in this room is on his side. She did not yet know that by the end of that week, she would be. She set her cold coffee down on the polished console table, opened her folder, and began to read. The Halberstram delegation arrived in New York on Tuesday evening. Quinn met them at the door of the Vance private dining room on the 42nd floor, in a borrowed black dress that had been hanging in the guest suite closet with the tag still on it. Ethan stood at the end of the room, half turned toward the window, his back almost military. He did not look at her when she came in. He looked at her briefly when Reginald Halberstram looked at her, and then he looked away again. Reginald Halberstram was a square-shouldered man in his late 60s with a Swiss accent and the kind of teeth that suggested very expensive dental work over many decades. His wife, Lucinda, wore an emerald gown that cost more than Quinn's annual rent. Two junior partners from the Geneva office trailed behind them like polite shadows. Halberstram took her hand and asked her, with theatrical politeness, what her role at Vance Holdings was. Quinn told him she was Mr. Vance's liaison this week. He held the word liaison in his mouth a moment too long, repeating it, as if testing the sound, and then turned to Ethan and observed that she was charming, very fresh, and that New York was generous with its young women. The room shifted. Quinn felt rather than saw the way Ethan's shoulders settled, and the way Pierce, behind his shoulder, very slightly closed his eyes. Ethan answered calmly that Miss Hartley was a guest at this dinner, not a topic. Halberstram protested, smiling, that he had meant only to compliment. Ethan, without raising his voice, told him plainly that he had not. Then he turned to Lucinda and offered to show her to her seat, and told Quinn that she was on his left. Quinn had not told him her first name. She let it go. Dinner was a thing of long courses and longer silences. Halberstram did most of the talking. He liked the sound of his own voice on the subject of consolidation, on the subject of efficiency, on the subject of the modern world's need for global brands rather than family names. Twice he made small, disparaging remarks about the Vance Tower itself, about the carpets, about the view, the way a man comments on a house he is about to buy and remodel. Quinn watched Ethan's hands go very still on either side of his plate. The dining room had been arranged with the kind of careful invisibility that only money knows how to buy. The walls were a pale, muted bronze. The candles had been lit 15 minutes before the guests arrived, so that no one would smell the matches. The floral arrangement was low and tight, ivory roses and dark green eucalyptus, set just below eye level, so that no flower would interrupt a sightline across the table. Two waiters moved at the edges of the room in soft black shoes that did not click on the floor. Quinn noted all of this in the way a hotelier notes the placement of light switches, automatically, without admiration. Somewhere in the building below them, she imagined, a junior member of the Vance staff had spent the morning rearranging this room twice. She would have rearranged it the same way. Halfway through the third course, Lucinda Halberstram leaned across the table and said, with the bright friendliness of a woman who had decided to be entertained, "Miss Hartley, tell me, what does a girl in your position dream about?" The two junior partners looked up. Pierce looked up. Ethan did not move. Quinn folded her napkin once on her lap and looked Lucinda in the face with the same calm she had practiced in mirrors for years. "Mrs. Halberstram, I was raised by parents who taught me that ambition is a private thing and that good company is a public one. So at this table tonight, I am being good company. What I dream about belongs to me." The room held very still for 1 beat, 2 beats. Then Reginald Halberstram laughed, suddenly and loudly, and slapped his palm against the linen. "Ethan," he said, "your liaison has teeth. I like her. Pour her a glass." Ethan turned his head, just a little, and looked at Quinn for the first time since she had come into the room. His pale grey eyes were unreadable, but the corner of his mouth, very faintly, lifted. "She does not need to be poured for," he said. "She will pour for herself when she wishes. Won't you, Miss Hartley?" "I will," Quinn said. "Thank you." After the dinner, after the goodbyes, after the elevator carried the Halberstrams down to their waiting car, and the dining room emptied, Ethan stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and looked at the lights of the river. Pierce had gone. The waiters had gone. Quinn had picked up her own water glass to carry to the kitchen out of habit before she remembered she was a guest. "Leave it," Ethan said, without turning. "Sit down, just for a moment." She sat in the chair Lucinda Halberstram had vacated. "Where did you learn to answer a question like that?" he asked. "From my mother. She taught school for 32 years. She said that nobody in a position of power had ever asked her what she dreamed about. She said the day someone did, she would answer. The day she answered, she said, she would know they were not in a position of power anymore." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That is a very dangerous thing to teach a daughter." She agreed that it was. He asked then why she had said it tonight at all. She had not needed to. She could have laughed. They would have liked it more. Quinn told him, simply, that she had not felt like laughing. He turned around at last. He looked tired. He looked younger than 33 when he was tired. He told her his name was Ethan when they were alone, and only when they were alone. She acknowledged it without using the name. He saw the small reluctance in her, and he did not press her on it. He laid out the next day in his quiet, exact way. The Mara Foundation breakfast at 8, a hospital groundbreaking at 11, the merger working session here at 3, a charity gala at the Astoria at 7. She would be at all 4. He told her to wear the grey dress in the closet for the breakfast, and to wear whatever she liked for the gala, on the grounds, he said, that he would not look at it. Quinn nodded. He wished her good night by her first name. She wished him good night by his title. She walked down the hall to the elevator and rode it to the 14th floor, and only when the door of the guest suite was closed behind her did she set her hand against the wood and breathe out. He had used her first name once. He had not noticed. The Mara Foundation breakfast went smoothly. Quinn stood 3 steps behind Ethan as he greeted donors, made notes on a small folded program when he asked her to remember a name, and refilled his water glass once when she saw him leave it untouched on a side table. He did not thank her aloud, but twice during the speeches, when a particular donor spoke too long and the audience grew restless, Ethan glanced sideways at her, and she very slightly tipped her chin, and he understood, and he closed the speeches gracefully, on time. She had spent the last hour before the breakfast standing in the small marble bathroom of the guest suite, pinning the grey dress at the shoulder where the seamstress had left a 1/4 inch loose, drinking a cup of black tea, and reading aloud the names on the donor list until they sat in her memory, in the same way her grandmother's recipes had once sat there. She had a memory for names when she gave herself an hour. The agency had paid for that hour, the same way they had paid for the dress, although neither of them knew it. There was a particular pleasure, she had decided sometime around 3 in the morning, in being underestimated by people who had purchased your services without reading your resume. The pleasure was small and private, and would last exactly 1 week. The hospital groundbreaking was muddier and warmer. Ethan turned the ceremonial shovel of earth, smiled politely for cameras, and accepted a hard hat from the foreman with both hands. A small girl in a yellow raincoat had been brought to present him with flowers. She was perhaps 6 years old. She did not want to be there, and she dropped the bouquet halfway through her short walk up to him. Quinn was the closest adult. She knelt. She gathered the flowers, brushed the wet petals back into shape, and set them gently into the girl's hands again. Then she stood back. She did not put herself in the photograph. The girl walked to Ethan and presented him with the bouquet. Ethan thanked her, with a real, small smile, and turned to find Quinn already retreating toward the second row. He held her eyes for a moment longer than the photographers expected, and then turned back to the press. In the car on the way back to the tower, he said, very quietly, "Most people would have stayed in the photograph." "It was not my photograph, Mr. Vance." "No," he said. "It was not." They rode the rest of the way in silence. The merger working session at 3 was longer and worse than she had expected. Pierce had her stationed in a corner of the conference room with a tablet and a stack of name cards, ostensibly so that she could update introductions on the fly. In fact, she suspected, so that she could be displayed as a pleasant ornament if any of the Halberstram delegation looked up. She listened. She was not supposed to. She did, anyway. What she heard, over 3 hours of careful, well-mannered argument across a long, pale table, was that the Halberstram offer was structured in 2 phases. The first phase, which the public would see on Friday, was a generous-looking valuation of Vance Holdings as an independent brand. The second phase, which would not be voted on for another 6 months, would quietly fold the consumer division, the philanthropic foundation, and the warehousing arm into a shared services hub in Geneva, and would lay off, by Pierce's own number stated aloud at minute 47, somewhere between 1,100 and 1,400 American employees. The press release, Pierce said, would frame this as restructuring efficiency. Quinn wrote nothing down. She did not need to. She had a memory for numbers. Her mother had drilled her in arithmetic flashcards on the kitchen floor of a small house in Pennsylvania when she was 4 years old. At the gala that evening, Ethan wore a black dinner jacket and a quiet, exhausted expression. Quinn wore a deep teal gown she had borrowed from the same closet that had given her the dinner dress. She had thought, when she put it on, that it was too dark for her. In the mirror of the ballroom restroom, she changed her mind. The color was not for her. It was a Vance color. She had become, for 1 week, part of his palette. The Astoria ballroom that evening was the warm gold of old champagne, lit from below by amber lamps and from above by a chandelier the size of a small carriage. The room held perhaps 300 people, in tuxedos and gowns that caught the light like quiet mirrors, and a 14-piece string ensemble at the far end, playing something that pretended not to be Gershwin. Waiters moved between the guests with silver trays of crystal flutes. The carpet under Quinn's heels was so thick that her steps made no sound. She walked the long edge of the room, with her hand resting lightly on Ethan's elbow, because the agency had instructed her that this was acceptable in photographs, and because she had begun, after 36 hours, to find the placement of her hand on his sleeve oddly steadying. He did not look at her, but he did not move his arm either. A society columnist found her near the bar. Quinn knew the woman by her byline. She was older, brittle, blonde, and bored. The columnist asked her, with theatrical lightness, who exactly she was. Quinn told her she was a guest. The columnist disagreed, briskly. She had asked 4 people. Quinn was an agency rental. Nobody at this event had heard of her before Tuesday morning. Quinn pointed out, mildly, that none of that was a question. The columnist tried again, more directly, and asked whether Ethan Vance was paying her for this evening. Quinn told her, simply, that he was not. The columnist's eyes brightened, and she pressed for a reason. Quinn answered that someone had needed to hold his program when he shook hands. The columnist opened her mouth to say something else, and then a tall shape arrived at Quinn's elbow, and Ethan Vance set his hand, lightly and very deliberately, on the small of Quinn's back. "Madeline," he said pleasantly, "you are not interviewing my guest." "Ethan, you are not. I would prefer if you did not. If you choose to anyway, I will spend the next 12 months declining your phone calls personally, and you and I both know exactly how long your column's relevance lasts when I do that." He smiled at the columnist. He did not move his hand from Quinn's back. The columnist excused herself. Ethan dropped his hand at once. He apologized to her quietly for the presumption of his hand on her back. Quinn told him it had not been a presumption, and thanked him. He asked whether she was tired. She said yes. He said so was he, and that they had 2 more hours. They got through the 2 hours. He did not touch her again. But twice during the speeches, when the room was hot with applause, and Quinn caught herself listing slightly on her heels, she felt him shift his weight and angle his shoulder, so that she could lean, if she needed to, against the side of his arm. She did not need to, but the offer was there. She did not forget it. On Thursday morning, Quinn went down to the kitchen of the residence floor at 6 in the morning, because she had not slept, and because she had grown up in a house where the answer to a sleepless dawn was a pot of soup. Ethan was already there. He was sitting at the marble island in a dark sweater and dark trousers, with the laptop open in front of him and a pot of coffee that had gone cold. He looked up when she came in and told her she should be asleep. She told him, without smiling, that he should be asleep also. He acknowledged the touche with the smallest exhale. She crossed to the refrigerator. She looked through it. She found a bone of leftover chicken, a half a yellow onion, a knob of ginger, a single bunch of celery, and 4 eggs. It was enough. She told him, plainly, that she was going to make soup, and asked whether he would like some. He watched her in his careful, exhausted way, and observed that it was 6 o'clock in the morning. She repeated the offer, a little more gently. He closed the laptop and agreed. She made the soup. He did not work while she made it. He sat at the island and watched her chop the onion and the ginger and the celery, watched her ladle stock from a carton, watched her break the 4 eggs into the simmering pot at the very end. He did not speak. The kitchen smelled, after 20 minutes, like a kitchen in a house where someone was loved. The kitchen itself was the strangest room in the residence floor. Whoever had decorated the rest of the building had given up at this door. The cabinets were a plain, warm oak, scratched in places near the handles. The kettle on the stove was an old, enameled thing with a chipped spout. The marble of the island had a single faint orange ring near one corner, where someone had once set a hot pan without thinking. Quinn understood, the moment she saw the ring, that the kitchen had been Hudson Vance's kitchen, and that nobody had renovated it after he was gone because nobody had wanted to. She did not say so aloud. She turned the heat under the soup down by half and set the lid askew across the pot. Steam curled up against the underside of the cabinet light and made the little bulb shine yellow rather than white. She set a bowl in front of him. She set a second bowl in front of the empty stool beside him, and after a small hesitation, she sat there. He took a spoonful. He took another. Then he set the spoon down. "My father used to make soup," he said. His voice was very low. "On Sundays, after my mother was gone. He was not a cook. He was very bad at it. The soup was always slightly burned at the bottom because he never stirred. But he made it every Sunday. He said hot food was how you told a house you had not given up on it." Quinn did not speak. "He has been gone 18 months, Ethan said. "I have not eaten soup since." "I'm sorry." "Do not be sorry. Be quiet, please, for 1 minute." She was quiet. He picked up the spoon again. He ate the soup. He ate all of it. When he set the empty bowl aside, his shoulders had come down 1/2 inch from where they had been when she walked into the kitchen. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." "Quinn." "Yes." "On Friday, at 6 in the evening, I am going to sign a contract that ends the company my father built. The board is going to vote yes. Pierce has had the votes for 3 months. The Halberstram offer is fair on paper, and ruinous in the second phase. 1,100 to 1,400 of my father's employees will be laid off in the spring. The Vance name will come off the side of this building by autumn. There is nothing I can do about it, because if I refuse the offer, the board will remove me as chief executive and approve the offer over my head. Either way, the company ends. The only difference is whether I sign it personally, or whether I am wheeled out of this building in front of the cameras as a man who could not protect what he was given." "You have known this all week." "I have known this for 3 months." "Then why am I here, Mr. Vance?" He did not answer for a long time. "Because," he said finally, "they wanted a young woman in the photographs of a man who is losing his father's company, so that the photographs would be of the woman." Quinn set her spoon down. "That is the worst thing anyone has said to me in a long time," she said. "I know. I am sorry I am here, Mr. Vance, if that is what I am here for. I would not have come if I had known." "That is why you were not told." She breathed out slowly. "Mr. Vance," she said, "you have 1 day left before that vote. You do not have to sign the contract personally. There are other things you can do." "Such as?" She looked at him steadily. "Such as not signing it. They will remove me. Then make them remove you in front of the cameras you hate. Make the press release theirs, not yours. If your name is going to be in the newspapers on Saturday morning, let it be in the headline of a man who was thrown out of his own building for refusing a deal that lays off 1,400 people, not in the byline of a man who quietly handed them the pen." He stared at her. "You said you do not speak in public, Miss Hartley." "I said I do not speak to the press, Mr. Vance. There is a great deal I will say in a kitchen at 6 in the morning that I will not say to a reporter at noon." He laughed, suddenly and quietly. It was the first time she had heard it. It changed his face entirely. "I will think about it," he said. "Please do." He looked at the empty bowl in front of him. "Stay through Friday. he said. "Whatever happens at the vote, stay through Friday. I do not want to be in this building alone on Saturday morning." "I will stay." "Thank you, Quinn." "You're welcome, Ethan." He looked up at her, surprised by his own name in her voice, and she looked down at her soup, surprised by it in her own. The Friday vote was scheduled for 6 in the evening in the boardroom on the 45th floor. Quinn spent the day quietly, the way she had spent every Friday of her childhood when her mother had had a hard week ahead, by tidying small things. She steamed the sleeves of his black suit. She returned the borrowed gowns to the closet on the residence floor with a folded note of thanks tucked into each garment bag. She walked once around the perimeter of the building and bought a paper bag of warm pretzels from a cart on 6th Avenue and ate one on the way back, because her mother had also taught her that big days required small, ordinary pleasures, or you forgot how to be human in the middle of them. At 5 o'clock, she went up to the 45th floor. The boardroom was filling. Pierce was there, in an even darker suit than usual, speaking quietly with the Halberstram delegation in the corner. Reginald Halberstram nodded to her across the room with a small, satisfied smile, as one nods to a piece of furniture one is about to inherit. Lucinda was not present. The rest of the Vance board, 11 men and 3 women in their 50s and 60s, were settling into their assigned chairs around the long, pale table. Ethan was not yet in the room. Quinn took her assigned position by the second window from the left and placed her hands together at her waist, in the small, unobtrusive shape the agency had taught her on the first morning. From this corner, she could see most of the room without being seen by most of it. The boardroom was longer than it was wide, panelled in a pale northern oak, with a single, low brass lamp on each end of the long table. The table itself had been polished that afternoon to the soft, blonde gleam of butter. 16 folded leather portfolios had been laid at 16 places. A small carafe of water and a single short glass stood beside each portfolio. Pierce had not allowed flowers in the room. He had once told a junior staff member, 2 years ago, that flowers in a boardroom suggested funerals. Quinn had heard the story from the staff member herself in the agency break room on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The world, she was beginning to understand, was very small at the top. A press pen had been set up against the back wall. 8 cameras, 4 reporters, one of them Madeline the columnist, who looked at Quinn with the bright, cold attention of a woman who had been embarrassed and had not forgotten it. Pierce crossed to her. "Miss Hartley," he murmured. "When Mr. Vance enters, you will stand at the second window from the left. You will not speak, you will not move. After the vote, you will accompany him out of this room and to the residence floor. You will be photographed leaving. That is your last duty. Your contract concludes at the close of business this evening." "Yes, Mr. Pierce." "Thank you for your work this week. The agency will be paid in full." "Thank you." He paused. "You handled the dinner well. The breakfast also. The columnist incident at the gala was unfortunate but contained. On the whole, you were better than we paid for." "That was kind, Mr. Pierce." "It was not kind. It was accurate. There is a difference." For the first time all week, the corner of his mouth softened. "Take your position, please, Miss Hartley." She took her position by the second window. The river outside was the colour of pewter. The room hushed. The door at the far end opened, and Ethan Vance came in. He was wearing the black suit she had steamed. He was not carrying a folder. He walked the length of the boardroom without looking at the press pen, without looking at the Halberstram delegation, without looking at Pierce. He looked at Quinn for 1 second, exactly long enough for her to lift her chin half an inch in the small private signal they had developed at the breakfast on Wednesday morning. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then he walked to the head of the table and remained standing. "Members of the board," he said. "Mr. Halberstram, members of the press. Thank you for coming." He set both hands flat on the table. "On Tuesday morning, an hour before I met any of you this week, an executive guest liaison was hired through an outside agency to accompany me to every public event of this week. I was not consulted. The board's communications committee made that decision in the belief that a young woman standing beside me in photographs would soften the public optics of what is about to happen in this room. They were correct. The optics have been soft. The photographs are flattering. I am told the social pages will be very kind on Saturday. He paused. The young woman's name is Miss Quinn Hartley. She is 27 years old. She is a graduate of Penn State University in hospitality management. She has worked in event coordination and luxury staging for the last 5 years. Earlier this week, she answered a personal question in front of the Halberstram delegation with more dignity than I have shown anyone in this building in 18 months. On Wednesday, she stepped out of a press photograph that would have been worth a great deal to her career in order to give it back to a 6-year-old girl in a yellow raincoat. On Thursday morning, she made me a bowl of chicken soup at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she told me, very quietly, that I did not have to sign this contract personally. The boardroom did not move. Pierce's face did not move. Reginald Halberstram's face did not move. "I will not be signing it," Ethan said. Pierce closed his eyes. "Mr. Halberstram," Ethan said, "the offer your firm has placed before this board is fair on its first page and ruinous on its second. I have read the second phase term sheet. I have read the consolidation schedule. I have read the layoff projection for the spring. My father hired the great-grandparents of some of the people on that schedule. I will not sign a contract that fires them in a Geneva spreadsheet." "Ethan," Pierce said, low, "the board has the votes." "Then exercise them, Marcus. Vote me out. Approve the deal over my head. I will leave this building tonight. The press release on Saturday morning will be the press release of a board that removed its founder's son for refusing a layoff. I will give exactly one interview about the second phase of the Halberstram offer on Sunday evening, and I will give it for free." Reginald Halberstram set down his pen. "Mr. Vance," he said, "this is unwise." "Mr. Halberstram, it is the first wise thing I have done since my father was lost to us." For a long moment, no one in the boardroom spoke. A camera shutter, somewhere in the press pen, clicked once, then twice, then stopped. Quinn watched the room from her corner without moving. Her hands stayed folded at her waist. She had learned a great deal about silence in the 7 years she had worked in luxury rooms, and the silence in this boardroom was the rarest kind. The silence of 14 well-paid adults, realizing simultaneously that the youngest person in the room had decided to behave like an adult also. Pierce was looking at his folder with the small, fixed expression of a chess player who has just understood that he has lost his queen, and that he is, in spite of himself, relieved. 2 of the older board members, near the foot of the table, were leaning very slightly toward Ethan, the way people lean toward a fire on a cold night. The river outside the window had gone almost violet under the early evening sky. A single barge moved north along the water, with its lights already on. Marcus Pierce drew in a breath, looked down at his folder, looked at the long table of board members, looked at Reginald Halberstram, and looked, for a long moment, at Ethan. Then he said, slowly, "I will withdraw the motion." A small, hard sound moved around the table. 2 of the board members shifted in their chairs. One of them, a grey-haired woman near the end, very softly said, "Thank you." Halberstram stood. He buttoned his jacket. He crossed the room, with his Geneva partners trailing behind him, and paused in front of Ethan. "Mr. Vance," he said, "my respects to your father." "Thank you, sir." Halberstram walked out. The door closed behind him. The boardroom was still. Ethan turned from the table. He crossed to the window where Quinn was standing. He did not touch her. He stopped 1 step away and looked down at her and said, very quietly so that the microphones did not catch it, "Did I do that correctly, Miss Hartley?" "You did, Mr. Vance." "Thank you for staying through Friday." "You're welcome." The press pen surged forward. Ethan turned and faced them. He answered 3 questions with extraordinary calm, declined a 4th, and walked her out of the boardroom himself, past Pierce, past the cameras, into the elevator. The doors closed. He did not speak in the elevator. He stood beside her with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders down for the first time in 7 days. And Quinn Hartley, who had been hired for 1 week, understood that he had just chosen her over his empire, and that the empire, somehow, had survived him doing it. The elevator opened on the residence floor. He walked her to the door of the guest suite. "Quinn," he said.
"Yes."
"My agency contract with you ends at 6 p.m. on Friday, according to Pierce."
"Yes."
"It is now 7 minutes past 6.
"Yes, Mr. Vance."
"Then the contract has ended."
"Yes."
"In that case," he said, "may I ask you to dinner? Tomorrow evening. Not a working dinner, not in this building, not in front of cameras. Only dinner. A great deal will depend on whether you say yes." She looked up at him. The corridor was empty. The whole long week, with its breakfasts and groundbreakings and gala columns and 4 o'clock soup, was sitting at the end of the hall behind her like a coach she could finally take off. "Yes," she said. "I will have dinner with you." "Tomorrow at 7, then?"
"Tomorrow at 7.
He nodded once. He turned. He walked back down the hall toward the elevator, and Quinn watched him go. And only when the elevator door closed behind him did she set her hand against the wood of her door and breathe out for the second time that week. She had been hired for 1 week. The week had ended. The story had not. 6 months later, on a clear evening in April, Quinn Hartley sat on the small terrace of a private restaurant on the Upper West Side, watching the sky go pink over the river, with a glass of cold, sparkling water in her hand. Across the small table, Ethan Vance was reading a folded newspaper and frowning at the financial section. "It says here," he announced, "that the chief executive of Vance Holdings is the most boring billionaire in New York." "That sounds correct." "It says he is rarely seen at galas, never seen at after-parties, and reliably accompanied at all public events by a dark-haired young woman who refuses to give the press her last name." "Also correct." "Mrs. Hartley. Miss Hartley still, Mr. Vance. 6 months. Soon. Soon." He folded the newspaper. He set it down. "Vance Holdings finished the first quarter 4% above projections," he said. "Without the merger. The consumer division stayed open. The foundation stayed funded. We did not lay off a single person in the spring. Marcus Pierce sent me a Christmas card. It was, I believe, the first Christmas card he has ever willingly sent any human being. I am proud of you, Ethan." He looked across the table at her. "That sentence is the only reason any of it happened," he said. "I want you to know that. It was not me. It was you in a kitchen at 6 o'clock in the morning, telling me to not sign a piece of paper." "It was not me, Ethan. I only said it. You did it." "Either way." He reached across the table, set his hand lightly over hers, and kept it there. "Either way." The waiter came. They ordered slowly. Quinn did not look at the menu for very long, because she had grown to know this restaurant, on this terrace, at this table, very well. Ethan brought her here on the second Saturday of every month. He had brought her here on the second Saturday after Friday, and the second Saturday after that, and every second Saturday since. When the waiter left, Ethan said, "I have something for you. It is small. It is not a ring. The ring is for next month, if you are still willing." "I am still willing." "This is something else." He took a small flat envelope from inside his jacket and slid it across the table. "Open it." She opened it. Inside was a single cream-colored card, printed in plain dark letters. It said, "Vance Holdings, Foundation Hartley Hospitality Grant. Established in honor of Emily Hartley, schoolteacher, Pennsylvania." Quinn pressed her hand flat against the card. She did not speak for a long time. "I am sorry," Ethan said gently. "I should have asked first. Tell me if I should not have." "You should have," she said. Her voice was a little uneven. "And I am glad you did not. It is funded for 30 years. It is for women in hospitality programs in small towns. It is named after your mother. I read what she taught you that night with Mrs. Halberstrom. I've been thinking about it for 6 months.
Ethan,
Yes,
thank you.
you're welcome, Quinn. The sky over the river was deep blue now. Lights were coming on along the bridge. Somewhere behind them, a piano had started in the dining room. Quinn turned the small cream card over in her hand once, set it carefully back in the envelope, and closed the envelope, and rested it on the table between them.
Pull a chair closer,
she said quietly. Ethan leaned forward on his elbows and looked at her. What did you say?
Pull a chair closer. It is the way my mother used to start every story. I never finished telling it to you.
Then finish it tonight.
All right.
She drew a small breath. She began. Across from her, the most boring billionaire in New York, who had once been hired a young woman for a week and had chosen her over his empire on the 7th day, set both hands on the table and listened, the way a man listens who has finally, after a very long time, come home. The story ended there. It began again, the way the best stories do, the next morning, in the quiet kitchen of a tower he had refused to give away, with 2 bowls of soup on the marble island and a kettle whistling softly in the dark.